like to call the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Board of Directors meeting to order.
Recording in progress.
Good evening, everyone. Calling Silicon Valley Clean Energy Board of Directors meeting to order. Today is September 11, and that's the Remembrance Day. Let's take a moment of silence in honor of all the lives that have been taken and in honor of the first responders who are always there to help and support, keep everyone safe. Okay, Andrea, can we, before we start the roll call, I believe we have Director Meadows, who's going to be making a statement so that she can participate under AB 2449.
Yes, that is correct. Director Meadows, whenever you're ready.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair Walia. So I am appearing remotely pursuant to AB 2449 under the Just Cause provision, because I am unable to attend in person due to a physical medical disability. There is no one there's no other individual 18 years or older is present in the room at my location. I will not be on camera, and I will abstain from votes and discussion during the regular meeting.
Thank you, Director Meadows.
Can we proceed with the roll call now?
Yes, thank you. In person, we have Director Showalter. Here. Director Mohan.
Here.
Mekachek.
Present.
Chair Walia.
Here.
Vice Chair Tyson.
Here.
Director Klein.
Here.
Director Lee.
Present.
Director Risto.
Present.
And joining us virtually, I have Director Martinez Beltran.
Here.
Alternate Director Armendariz.
Here.
Director Chua.
Here.
Director Meadows. Just gave her statement. Thank you so much. And I'll note that we have Director Scozola absent, but we do have a quorum of our board, including 7 in person, to meet the AB 2449 requirements.
Thank you so much. Let's start with public matters on items that are not on tonight's agenda. This is the time where you can speak on something which is not on the agenda. Do we have someone in person or online, Andrea?
None in person and no hands raised online.
Okay, let's close that, and we'll move on to consent calendar. And before I call for consent calendar public comments, I'd just like to point out that item number 1D, D for David, is to pass a resolution recognizing Clean Air Day. And this year, California's Clean Air Day has been declared as October 2nd to be that day. And at SVCE, our work is reducing emissions, and that is definitely one of the things that goes towards improving the air quality. Just wanted to pull that out as a remark. With that, do we have any public comments on consent?
No, Chair.
Okay, bring it back to the board. Do I have a motion or any comment?
Motion. I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar, items 1A through 1I.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Director Chua, I assume? Okay.
Yes.
Can we have a vote, please?
Yes. Chair Walia.
Aye.
Vice Chair Tyson.
Yes.
Director Mohan.
Aye.
Risto.
Aye.
Mekachek.
Aye.
Showalter.
Aye.
Klein.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Armendariz. Director Armendariz.
Yes.
Thank you. Martinez Beltran.
Yes.
Chua.
Aye.
Thank you. I'll note we have an abstention vote from Director Meadows and an absence from Director Scozola, but that motion carries.
Thank you. Let's move on to the regular calendar, and we'll start with item number 2, which is the CEO's report. And we have our CEO, Monica Padilla, presenting that.
Good evening, Chair and Directors. So first item, one of my favorite things to do every month, it feels like nowadays, is to introduce new employees. So today we'll introduce 2 employees, including Ashley Park, our newest Community Outreach Fellow, and then Anand Govindarajan, our new Senior Quantitative Analyst. I think they both would like to address the board.
Wonderful.
Starting with Ashley.
Ashley, you're coming over to the microphone.
You have to come all the way up here.
Welcome to SVCEA, and we'd love to hear
Hello.
something about you.
Thank you. It's so nice to meet you all. I just wanted to introduce myself really quickly. So I'm Ashley. I'm the new Outreach Fellow at SVCE. And a little bit of background about me. I am a recent grad, so I finished my bachelor's last June with Environmental Management and Protection at Cal Poly SLO. And I also double minored in Sustainable Environments and GIS. And since graduating, I finished an internship with the Sierra Club, where I also did outreach with them. I was working with the Northern Chumash Tribal Council for the newly proposed Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. And although this is a very different industry, I think something that really drew me to this position was my experience at my last internship. I think what I learned from that is how much I love communicating with diverse audiences and different communities. And so I think I really want to learn more about how to do that, especially in this industry. And some fun facts about me. I love fashion, I love thrifting, I like to golf, although I'm not very good, and I am a big foodie, so I love trying new cuisines and new restaurants. But it's so nice to meet you all, and I'm really excited to learn while I'm here.
Welcome, Ashley. Thank you so much. And next we have Anand Govindarajan. Welcome to SVCE, Anand.
Thank you so much. Really nice to meet everyone. I'm Anand Govindarajan, and I joined SVC as the Senior Quantitative Analyst. At my previous job,
Can you speak into the microphone so that's recorded? Yeah. That'll be better. Thanks.
At my previous job, for about 6 years, I was providing or developing quantitative models, focusing on power market dynamics and providing consulting and analytical solutions to CCAs, traditional utilities, and storage and renewable developers. Before that, I did an internship with the National Renewable Energy Lab, focusing on creating models for solar adoption in low-income households. I have a bachelor's in chemical engineering from National Institute of Technology in India. Moved here for grad school in 2009. Finished my master's and PhD in energy economics and policy from Penn State. I'm married. Like something personal about myself, like I'm married. My wife, Claire, she's a teacher in Denver Public Schools. Outside of work, we both like to hike and play tennis together. Really, grateful for the opportunity at SVC, and having to apply all the theoretical knowledge I've gained for the last few years, and learning more about the actual operations of how businesses work. Super excited to learn and contribute.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anand. And both of you, Ashley and Anand, welcome to Team SVC. It keeps on growing, which is lovely. And I'm just observing one is from Cal Poly SLO and the other is from State College in Penn State. So that's true diversity here. Okay, back to you, CEO Padilla.
Okay, just some other things to just share with the board. Of course, there's also the CEO report, so if anybody has any questions or things that you'd like us to follow up on, feel free to ask now. But a few other items. This week, we are having our quarterly in-person retreat. And the theme of this quarter's retreat is Employee Appreciation Month. And so I took the liberty of declaring the whole month Employee Appreciation Month. One of our directors reminded me that every day should be Employee Appreciation Day, and that is true. But we're making it extra special this month. So we will all gather, all 60-something of us, tomorrow and Friday for a whole bunch of collaboration, learning, work, some fun, and some food. As part of that, we will be touring the Civic Center for the City of Sunnyvale. Our esteemed Mayor Larry Klein will be guiding us through that tour, so we're excited about that. We'll also be unveiling the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Dream Home, and this is a home on wheels that features all electric appliances. So if you have a chance to come by the offices, it'll be most likely across the street at the Sunnyvale Civic Center, because I don't know if we can get it into our parking lot. It's quite big, but it'll be there if you want to check it out for yourself. And thank you again for approving that budget to get that built. We're quite excited. We heard that it was at the Mountain View Arts and Wine Festival and that we had hundreds of people touring it. Oh, Director Showalter got to see it herself. So we're quite excited about the amount of attention that's going to bring to us. And then we have a brief presentation by Jess Cornejo on member agency grants. And so, oh, there she is. And then that will conclude my CEO report.
Good evening, board. My name is Jess Cornejo, and I am the Senior Program Specialist at SVCE. I am really excited to be here in front of you today to provide a really brief presentation / announcement that SVCE will release new community grants for the member agencies as well as community organizations in 2 phases. Okay, so last December, the board approved $10 million for community grants. And so $6.5 million from that $10 million allocation will be dedicated to member agency grants in the form of non-competitive and competitive funding. Both grants will fund projects that address building and transportation electrification, resilience, and community engagement and education. Secondly, we will release $3.5 million in competitive community grants for similar resilience and electrification projects for groups like schools, religious organizations, and nonprofits. So the non-competitive and competitive member agency grants will be the first phase of grants that we will release with an anticipated launch in October of this year, so next month. The second phase will entail releasing the competitive community grants in the spring of next year. SVCE will send out communications to various agency contacts, such as yourselves, city managers, and city staff, once the member agency grants have launched. So we look forward to working with each of your communities and ensuring that we deploy really awesome decarb projects in our community. Thank you.
Thanks, Jess. That's something we have all been talking about with staff, and it's good to see it coming to fruition where all the member agencies can apply for these grants. Some are competitive and some are non-competitive, as well as not to miss the fact that some nonprofit organizations can also participate. Spreading the word, bringing awareness, and educating is a key part of keeping the mission alive. And one request, Monica, you mentioned the Home on Wheels. If we could get an email as to where we could go and when, just not to create work, but if somebody remembers,
Sure.
it'll be great.
Yeah, once we figure out where it can actually park,
Sure.
we'll send out the location. We'll have Andrea send something out. I also just want to mention with the community grants, in the CEO report, there's a link to a presentation that we provided to the executive committee last month that has some really good information about the grants, how they're going to get split, what qualifies, more information. And if you're really eager to learn about them before we send out additional information, that would be a good place to get more details.
Yeah, thanks. That was really very well described and very well put together. I know I found it very helpful and useful to give a heads up to my city staff. And so that's thinking ahead and planning ahead. Okay, any comments, questions on CEO's report? Anyone online? How about public comment?
No, Chair.
Okay, wonderful. Let's move on to item number 3, which is It's a very interesting meeting today. Everything is very, very, very important. So we are moving to adopt the fiscal year 2024-25 recommended operating budget, staff benefits update, as well as updated reserves policy targets. And the presentation is going to be by our CFO and Director of Administrative Services, Amrit Singh.
Okay, good evening, directors. So I bring to you the next fiscal year's budget for approval. We discussed this budget in detail at the last month's meeting, as is our policy. 2 months before end of our fiscal year, we bring a draft budget so that we can incorporate any comments the board gives us. We didn't have too many comments. There was one area of discussion, and I will elaborate that on, as we get to the main part of the presentation. So today, I will go through the budget very briefly. I'll just recap the key messages, but I'm certainly open to elaborate any part of the budget that you may have questions on. So we're doing three things at the end. We'll be approving the budget, the staff benefits, and revising our reserves policy. As is practice, we review our reserves policy at the time we approve the budget. So timeline, we're approving the budget today. In November and December timeframe, if you remember, one of the key variables that have a huge impact on our budget, which is basically where the PCIA is going to be end up, and a key determinant of establishing PCIA is CPUC's publishing market price benchmark. And because given the uncertainty as to where this measure will be, we and the CPUC is going to do so in mid-October, as we have done in last few years. We will refresh the budget again for revenues and energy supply expenses, and present that to the Finance Committee in November, and bring it for the full board approval, a refreshed budget where we'll just update those two line items. And then at that meeting, we can discuss any additional expenditures, as well as the rates that we want to implement for the next calendar year. And then as we do always, we will have a mid-year refresh of the budget, full budget, in March. Okay, so the key highlights of the budget. As we have put the budget together in around July of this year, we were showing a positive contribution to reserves of $14 million. Now, if we were to update the budget today with updated market prices, this number of 14 million would actually be something close to negative 5 to 6 million, because energy prices are coming down. If you remember, when energy prices come down, it has an adverse impact on us because the PCIA is going to be higher. And but if you remember the discussion from last month, while energy prices have come down significantly, RA and RPS prices are very, very high level. And they are at such high levels that they can more than offset the the impact of declining energy prices. And so this is where this measure is really dependent on how the CPUC will establish the market price benchmark, and what they will establish the price for RA and RPS that will be used in determining PCIA. As we discussed last month, staff did an estimate of where we think the prices may come up. Again, we don't know, CPUC, what their prices will be, but using the methodology we know they're using, we did some estimates, and we said, given the high prices, that can actually create an upswing in revenues of $145 million. So we have a potential to be a very good fiscal year, similar to last year. One thing to note is that PG&E had been advocating, if you remember the discussion last month, that the CPUC not to reflect latest updated RA prices, but to use last year's prices, which is how we have established this budget. But the good news is the CPUC said, well, we can consider that argument in another proceeding, but for the upcoming PCIA proceeding, they want to continue with the current established methodology. So indications are it looks good that the MPBs will be higher. It may or may not be what we're estimating, but we think it's going to be a good number that's going to provide a good upward movement to the budget. So this budget is conservative for that reason. So in setting the customer discount, which again we will revisit at the December timeframe, for this budget we've assumed 4% discount, general discount for all customers. And as we've done in the past, we've taken 1%, the dollar equivalent of granting 1% to everyone, but translating into dollar bill credits to low-income customers, which is around $13 to $14 monthly bill credits. The other changes, we're updating employee compensation to reflect COLA and merit, and that's a 6% budgeted. As we discussed last time, there are some minor changes we're bringing to staff benefits. One of the discussion items we brought was adding a new staff holiday for Cesar Chavez Day. We had a discussion at the board to consider one more holiday. There was a recommendation to consider a specific holiday. What we are proposing today is to add one more holiday as a floating holiday. This way, staff can celebrate a day that is more meaningful to them, as opposed to specifying a particular day. The other thing we talked about at the budget last time is we're updating our reserves policy based on the stress test analysis that we had presented in June. We're increasing our targets from 300 to 350 days. We are not proposing to increase the upper target, but we're saying let's round that up from 490 days to 500 days of cash on hand. Okay. In the next slide, I show the line items of the budget. This is how you can see the contribution to reserves of $14 million. Again, as I said, using the same assumptions, if I were to update that, this number would probably be negative given the continued decline in energy prices. But the big variable here is the drop in energy revenues, and that has to do with increases in PCIA, which we think when the CPUC establishes the new market price benchmarks, again reflecting higher RA and RPS prices, this number has a potential to swing upwards, the revenue number to swing upwards by $145 million. But again, that's a ballpark estimate. We're not counting on that. We'll wait until the CPUC number comes out in October, and then we'll refresh the budget, discuss it with the Finance Committee, and then we'll bring it to the board again in December. So that actually is my presentation today. In summary, looks like it could be a very good year. Again, the uncertainties is the PCIA and what those market price benchmarks will be when the CPU establishes them. We proposed a 4% discount with 1% bill credit to low-income customers. We can revisit this when there's more certainty on PCIA and PG&E rates. At that time, we can discuss any additional expenditures. The other item that we had discussed was in the current fiscal year, we had set aside $20 million for purchasing the building. As we discussed, we want to delay that decision. In the budget, we assumed, in a 5-year budget projection, we assumed that would happen in 2028. Our current plan is to look for a leasing space, and while we continue to find a perfect building solution for us. And we will bring this item before the end of this year in a closed session for the board's approval. So with that, I'm open to any questions. Again, there are a lot of information in the staff report, a lot of information in the appendix. A lot of the slides I discussed in detail, I've moved them to the appendix. I'm certainly open to go through that in details. So I'll take questions, and then we can go for the board approval.
Thank you, Amrit. Certainly, we have all visited this couple of times, and as you said, it looks good at this point. The variables are unknown. Adding $14 million into the reserves, increasing target days cash on hand, improving benefits to staff, maintaining 4% discount over PG&E rates, it looks pretty good. So, questions? Director Lee.
Thank you, Amber, for the great report as always. First, I just want to thank staff for adding this floating holiday after my request on this issue, and really glad that this also provided flexibility for employees to take off on their selected day to celebrate. In this case, whether Lunar New Year or Indigenous Peoples' Day or whatever it may be. So thank you very much for making it happen. As far as the budget is concerned, the current projection into reserve is 14 million, but there's a conservative estimate, which is good. We want to be conservative fiscally when it comes to budgeting. But the other issue that we talked about is, of course, potentially giving further discount if the surplus is greater. So I guess my question would be, when we come back in mid-year, when would that be around? You think January timeframe?
So when we bring the budget, we'll discuss it with the Finance Committee in November. So in October, we'll have good indication. We won't know the final CPUC rates. That actually happens very late in December, right before the implementation in January. But we'll have a good indication when they set us the market price benchmarks, which should come around October timeframe. So we'll be able to use our models, the consulting models, so that we use to estimate what the impact will be. Based on that, like last year, we can propose various funding scenarios, additional funding scenarios for board's consideration.
Right.
So we will do that with the board in December.
Right, and the cost for every % of discount off the PG&E rate is approximately $4.5 to $5 million
Correct.
to our general number, right?
Yeah, it's about 5 million. It's a good
Right,
number.
so we're looking forward to it, and if we somehow end up with 40 or 50 million plus, more than what we expected, then we certainly would love to visit those issues. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Director McAjee.
Sorry, I don't have the list in front of me. Who's on the Finance Committee?
We have alternate director Srini Vasan. We have Pat. Showalter. We have Hong Wei. And who am I missing? Oh, Elliot. Scozola.
Thank you. I had just forgotten who was on the committee. Thank you.
Other questions? Let's open public comment. Closing public comment. Okay, bringing it back to the board. There are 3 parts. I need a motion unless there are comments. It's looking good to me. So, Director Showalter.
I move the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconded by Director Lee? Can we have roll call vote, please?
Yes, thank you. And this is for Resolution 2024-13. Chair Walia?
Aye.
Vice Chair Tyson?
Yes.
Director Mohan?
Yes.
Risto?
Aye.
Makachek?
Aye.
Showalter?
Yes.
Klein?
Aye.
Lee?
Aye.
Armendariz?
Yes.
Martinez Beltran?
Yes.
Chua?
Aye.
For Director Meadows, I will note an abstention vote, and Director Scozola is absent, but the motion carries.
Thank you. With that, we move on to item number 4, which is to adapt the fiscal year 2024-25 strategic focus areas and strategic plan. This is, again, the real work we do, or the real part of how we keep going. And CEO Monica Padilla.
Okay, so this is another one that you've seen a few times, either at the board or if you're on the executive committee, So I will try to also provide a very brief update and then hopefully get your vote at the end. So we can go to the next couple of slides, Andrea, the next one. Just to remind you of our process, we came to the board back in June with some feedback and kind of just a consensus on what we thought our strategic focus area priorities should be for the year. And that's, we got pretty good support and feedback from the board that the strategic focus areas that we were proposing were the ones that in fact we should move forward. And then we also came to the executive committee in August to reaffirm those strategic focus areas and to introduce the strategic planning goals for the fiscal year 24-25. We are now at the point where we need approval of these goals and strategic focus areas. So next slide. Again, this is a process that we undertake every year, and it starts with looking at all the opportunities and threats and risks and challenges that we see kind of in the external space, and internally looking at what our opportunities and needs are as well. And so we do that assessment, and that's something that, you know, we take very serious to do that scan of the environment. And then we develop the strategic focus areas and determine whether we need to change them or the ones that we have right now still ones that we need to pursue. And then we also, at the same time, we're working on the budget, and just like you saw, we eventually, you know, our goals and strategic focus areas and everything else kind of feeds into the budget as well, and it all kind of comes together. It also gives us an opportunity every year to relook at our mission and say, is this our mission? Is this the mission we should continue? And every year since we've started, we've reaffirmed that mission, and so that still stays. Quickly, then the next slide. These are the strategic focus areas that you approved for fiscal year 24. Next slide. These are the ones that we proposed for fiscal year 24-25. We have not made any changes. The executive committee was fine with them as well, so they stand the same way we shared with you in June and at the executive committee meeting. And then we switched our focus, the next slide, Andrea. We switched our focus to the strategic plan itself. And so now that we have our mission and we have our strategic focus areas, we need to focus on the goals. And this exercise is one that involves much of staff. We went through all the goals that we had at SVCE, and we had something like 25 goals in our strategic plan for fiscal year 24. So we look at those and we see where are opportunities for us to kind of either merge them, eliminate them, simplify them, improve them, or add goals. And so we went through that exercise both with all of staff and then with what I call the leadership team, which is the department heads and leaders of teams throughout the organization. We can go to the next slide. So what we ended up with is what we think is a strategic plan that really reflects how we get work done at SVCE. So in previous strategic plans, the goals aligned with the departments. And so we have several departments in the organization. We have finance and admin, we have decarbonization programs and policy, we had procurement and operations, then we had the legislative, regulatory, and policy team. So we had and then we also had ESCR, which is the Energy Services and Community Relations. So we had all these departments, and they were all developing their own goals. But what was happening is that the way that the goals were being represented almost looked like we were creating these silos in a way. So we decided to scrap that all and then just get together and say, what do we do and how do we do it together? So we went through that process and we identified these as the functional areas that exist within SVCE. And as I said, we were able to go from 25 goals down to 10. We've originally had 11, but we got feedback from the executive committee, thank you, and so we were able to come down to 10. And these goals have measures or initiatives associated with them as well. And in the past, those measures were part of our strategic plan that the board also got to review and approve. But a lot of those measures are very tactical and kind of things that we do on a day-to-day basis, and some of them no longer become priorities or become obsolete. And so I also felt that it wasn't necessary to bring the actual measures to the board for approval, but we do provide them for awareness. In the past, we had something like 80-something measures that we would bring to the board, and we managed to pare that down to, I think, 20 or 30 or so. And then the last big update that we'll have as part of the new strategic plan for fiscal year 24-25 is that Andrea will be bringing to the board on a quarterly basis an update on our progress towards meeting these strategic focus areas and these key goals. So we look forward to seeing those reports. On the next slide, Andrea. These are the 10 goals that we agreed to and that the executive committee has supported. And so they are very much aligned with what we do and what we need to do in order to meet our strategic focus areas. And I won't read through all of them, but happy to answer or elaborate on any of them if you need me to. We'll go to the next slide. So that brings me to the end. We would like for you to adopt the proposed fiscal year 24-25 strategic focus areas and strategic plan.
Thank you, Monica. You presented it very well. This is, 7 months of work. Started in February, and we have gone through it one bite at a time in different committee meetings and also brought to the board earlier last month. Looks awesome, and it actually shows how streamlined it is, how collaborative it is, as you said, not based on functional areas within Team SVCE, not based department-wise, and also looks very clean. I remember that exec committee meeting, the 10. It reads very well, I have to say. Just look at slide 6 and slide 9, I believe, and those two just present what SVCE is all about. And certainly completely agree about taking the measures of board approval, because you need flexibility to run the organization. Questions? No? Go ahead.
I'll just make a comment. It's interesting, having been here for a few years, and to see how this has evolved, and I say that in very much a positive way. And as your organization has also grown, the capabilities. So I'm very pleased with this, and plus, as a board member and on the executive, we see it multiple times, so there's no surprises, and it comes together nicely. So I'm complimenting all of SVCE on this.
Thank you. Public comment? Seeing none, I close public comment, bring it back to the board for a motion.
Move to
Yeah,
adopt the strategic focus area strategic plan for 24-25.
Okay, that was Director Lee who moved, and Director Mekachek.
I'll second.
Okay, can we have a vote, please?
Yes, thank you. Chair Walia?
Aye.
Vice Chair Tyson?
Yes.
Director Mohan?
Yes.
Risto?
Aye.
Mekachek?
Aye.
Showalter?
Yes.
Klein?
Aye.
Lee?
Aye.
Armendariz? Armendariz, if you're there for a vote.
Yes.
Thank you. Martinez Beltran?
Yes.
Chua?
Aye.
Director Meadows, an abstention
Yes.
vote.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We got your vote. Thank you. And Director Scola is absent, but we did pass that motion.
Okay, wonderful. That takes us to item number 5, which is the local agency action planning. This is an informational item, and Zoe Elizabeth will be presenting. She is the Deputy Director of Decarbonization Programs and Policy, and she is very quickly right there. Go ahead, Zoe.
Hi, good evening. Okay, so this is our regular bi-monthly update on really all of the wonderful work that you and your agency staff are doing. But also, since it is Employee Appreciation Month, I want to just take a moment, because I get to come up here and talk to you all, but really this is a huge team effort. And so Tony Yulo, who is here this evening, Napur Hiremath, and Benna Chang, all of us work really collaboratively on this. It's a team effort. All of us have spent many years working in local government and actually do this work serving you all because we believe in the power of local government so much. So I get to be here talking, but I really want to recognize it's a team effort. Okay, so I'm going to provide a quick status update. As you all know, this work is about getting building electrification to scale and reducing local pollution, but also really preparing and ensuring as smooth a possible readiness towards appliance standards that will require zero pollution appliances starting in 2027. So provide that and updates on where your agencies are. And just a quick reminder, this is, we have a set of about $4 million overall in resources to support you over the next several years, most of those in technical support, but also access to consultants for community engagement, technical analysis, all sorts of things. Okay, so really quick, an update on the BACMed rules. So these are air quality rules that the Air District is putting in place because currently the Bay Area is out of compliance with clean air standards. I've realized recently not everybody's aware of that, but we are out of compliance with clean air standards. And so the and appliances are one of the largest actually contributors to poor air quality. The staff recently estimated that these rules are the same as removing all cars in the Bay Area from the roads. So they have a really significant impact on air quality, public health, and of course also greenhouse gas emissions. The rules are set to go into effect in 2027, but the next important step in that phase is that the staff is developing an informational report to their board basically on market readiness. This is not an easy thing to do, so they're reporting on things like housing, workforce readiness, technology readiness, and that will go to the board in December. We are working really closely with all of our Bay Area CCA counterparts to think about research that we can provide to BACMed, and also just efforts that we can do to collaborate. We're planning to do some work actually with contractors coming up in the next year, and just had a meeting with their executive team a little over a week ago. And two other notes, we've said this before, but South Coast Air Quality Management District, which is even larger than BACMed, is working on similar rules. They recently passed them, but they're kind of doing a different order. So they're starting with large commercial heaters first, and they'll move to smaller water heaters that are in residential small businesses after. A note, they also are including new construction in their rules. And then statewide, the Air Resources Board are working on similar rules that could make the phase out of gas water heaters statewide. Their current proposal is on a similar timeline to BACMed. I wouldn't be surprised if that gets pushed back, but that is what the current proposal is. Okay. Again, part of our way to help you all and our communities to get ready is the ways that we can have sensible permitting policies as well as codes that basically reduce friction and slow that on-ramp to 2027 so people can start getting ready when it's most sensical for them when they're doing other kinds of activities. So we've put together, actually in concert with your staff, these different tiers of activities, and have worked with each of your member agencies to develop action plans that kind of meet those different requirements. Each agency is able to kind of work where they're from. This is very much a moving target. I just want to kind of share that, right? Some of these goals and where people are progressing towards will shift over the coming weeks. As one example, we actually just had Tony had a wonderful meeting with Los Gatos, and their plan is now finalized, and they're interested in moving towards the leading. Actually, they're really excited to push toward many of the leading policies. So many of these things will change. As we finalize these in the next month, we will be then getting back to each of you individually on what the plan is for your agency and kind of what the timeline would look like, what questions you have, and where your involvement would be beneficial. So lots of work ahead. And also, I should say, we've already done a lot of work, even more unexpected work as there was, changes from the Ninth Circuit come down, so things have been shuffling. So we want to end with a little bit of celebration to note here that we are doing these things, but already you all are leaders. In that meeting that we had with BACMed, they are often reflecting back on many of the things that are happening in this territory. So two shout outs here. Campbell has passed an ordinance that ensures all major renovations will be zero emissions. Applies to any project that's over $185,000 or removes like 75% of the roof or walls, so big projects, but they are to be zero emissions. There's some sensible exceptions in there. And Monte Sereno has already hit the goal that we have for all of our cities to have heat pump water heaters turned over within 24 hours, so a model already in place. You all, we can race towards that finish line too. Thank you all so much. It's a pleasure to work with you on this.
Thank you, Zoe. Congratulations, Monte Sereno. And Elliot, too bad you aren't here right now for Campbell. Boy, that's pressure on the other West Valley cities. I just feel it. Right, Sheila? Okay. Truly, this is a big thank you to staff. Our cities are spread thin, as I have said numerous times. We can't do it at the pace we would like to without the coordinated effort and collaboration and literally hand-holding from SVCE. So that's a big thank you to SVCE on behalf of all the 13 agencies. Questions? Director Mohan?
Yeah, I think all of us would like to be like Campbell and Monte Sereno. But my question is, and we have Ursula from our staff who's sitting there. Yes. Our city council is actually deliberating on modifying the REACH code in the next couple of weeks. So did Campbell and Montecito also have to do that, or in light of the Berkeley decision? So are we the only ones having to do that, or are there other?
No, there are other cities. I don't have the list in front of me of those that have changed them, but we'd be happy to send a follow-up email that shares all of the details of what each city has done.
Okay, but I'm assuming all cities will have to have some modification in light of the Berkeley case, right? Or no?
I think different cities have kind of slightly different evaluations, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I was going to say it depends on what your starting point is. And our starting point was not that, quote, aggressive. And plus, we don't have any commercial buildings. So ours is a little bit easier, and our starting point was a little lower. So just to make that comment.
I think it would be helpful if your staff works with SVCE and each city, exactly as Director Makachek just said. The situation varies from city to city. I can certainly share that in Saratoga, even though we were not the leaders, yet we had to step back. We did that, I believe, last meeting. So yes, adjusting to that Berkeley ban situation is happening in some cities. For sure, Saratoga had to do that. And I see Director Risto and then Director Showalter.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, Director Mohan, because I was curious too how this would mesh with the fact that most of us have to deal with the Berkeley decision. And certainly in Los Gatos, I mean, originally we thought we'd have some time, or we weren't dealing with restaurants, but in fact, we've been told that we need to step back on residential as well. We have quite a few builder's remedy and housing element projects coming forward. And I think what our community is going to be relying on is the building code, because the building code requires everything to be electric ready, even if you put the gas lines in. So what we're assuming is it would be less expensive for somebody who's putting in a 300 unit building is not going to double plumb. So we're hoping that they'll just go straight electric, but we can't require it at this point.
And so we have met with every city staff actually over the last kind of probably 6 months. We've been meeting individually with folks and developed kind of different. We have 2 different model code options for folks that are looking for other ways to address the pollution from appliances in new construction. And each city then takes that information back and makes an individual decision. But we do have the resources, and then we've also met with each individual city staff and working really closely with Cupertino.
Yeah,
and
thanks.
if I could just continue,
Sure.
and I do want to thank staff because I appreciate the fact that 1, we got the information on what all the other cities are doing, and 2, ideas for how to get to the goal in a variety of ways.
Oh, yeah.
So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why I call this SVCE 3.0, where we are all working together and we are getting the support. The cities are getting the support from SVCE. That's kind of where the situation is in the industry. Director Showalter.
Yeah, I was going to comment that we rescinded our all-electric building code about 3 months ago, and staff has come forward with a sort of a fill-in, which, as you said, requires not only is everything wired for electricity, but it also has to require the room to put in electrical appliances if that's more than the natural gas ones would be. And then we also really want to look carefully at what happens next summer in the building code update, because the building codes are updated on a 3-year cycle. And so we're expecting to sort of jump back in when the proposals for that update come in and change it. But then the other thing I wanted to mention is I got some assistance. I serve on the National League of Cities Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources Committee, and I might have mentioned this last time, but we put together resolutions for all of the cities to advocate on and for the NLC to advocate on. And we did have a presentation on modernizing the Energy Policy Act of 1975 that, that this court cited. And it was actually given by one of the attorneys who had argued at the Supreme Court. So that was really very interesting. And she had some suggestions of how we would do it. But it was a little too late in our process for getting these together. We have to have them finished by the end of this month. So the plan is to work on that for next year. So I just wanted to say that it's like, I think we need to hit this on all cylinders. And so, we're busy working on it locally, and that's very, very important. But I also think the advocacy, making sure that our laws are modernized is important too. So I wanted to mention that. And thank you to Benna Chang and Zoe Elizabeth for helping me with that.
Thank you for your insights on that. Open for public comment? No? Bring it back to the board. Any other comments? This is an informational item. If no other comments, I'll move on. Big thank you to Zoe.
Thank you.
And to everyone else who's been working on this. Okay, moving to item number 6. Yet another very important item. Clean Pathways and 24/7 study. This is a discussion item today, and it's going to be presented by Maureen Wenzel, Director of Regulatory Policy and Planning.
Before she gets started, could I just say a couple of words on this topic?
Sure.
So as a board, you all get to do things that are important, like pass budgets and approve strategic plans. Very important stuff. But every once in a while, you get to really think about what the vision is for SVCE, and how do we create a path and a vision, and how do we do the things that are necessary to fulfill that vision. And when we're talking about something that feels like it's beyond our reach in terms of time, because Maureen's here to talk about how do we get to 100% clean by 2045. So 20 years out. Well, believe it or not, we have to do a lot of things today to get to 2045. And we really, really would love this opportunity for you all to kind of absorb the analysis, but really ask important questions and give us some feedback that could help us come back another time and provide you some really good kind of recommendations and pathways. So I hope that you guys get the importance of this in really making good policy for the agency. And with that, I'll pass it to Maureen.
All right, thanks, Monica. Yeah, that's a great intro, because yes, tonight we're here to talk a little bit about a number of different ways that we think SVCE might be able to get to 2045. We'll mostly be looking at 2035 this evening to, under different clean metrics and targets that we might use along the way. So before we get into the results of the study that we've been doing with E3 over the last several months, we wanted to start with some background and really some fundamentals to sort of refresh the board on some key concepts before we jump into the results. So we'll talk about some of those things. Then we'll look at the study results. We'll talk a little bit about our current portfolio, and then we'll also provide some risk analysis that was done in-house with the results from E3. And then with that, we can wrap with some board discussion, looking at some key policy and planning questions. So these are the questions that we're going to come back to at the end of the presentation this evening, but we wanted to put them up front so that you can think about them as we go through the discussion. So the two in bold are really the key questions that we're trying to think through. One is, what should our clean targets be, both clean in a GHG-free basis, so nuclear and large hydro and RPS, and then also just a specifically RPS clean target in the next 20 years. And also, how do we want to calculate that clean target? Do we want to look at an annual target, as we've been doing historically? Do we want to look at an hourly target, or is there some other metric that we want to use? And I think as we talk through this evening, a number of these other questions that aren't in bold will also perhaps be relevant as we go ahead. So as I said, first we wanted to start by doing a quick refresher on really what SVC is all about, or not what SVC is all about, sorry, what our portfolio is really all about, and the primary products that we trade in the market. And so essentially what our portfolio's value is dependent on is 3 products, right? The first one being energy, right? The real-time cost of the resources that our PPAs are putting into the CAISO market. And then we also have 2 really important compliance metrics that we use. So one is the renewable energy credits, or the RECs, that we use in order to achieve our RPS compliance. And then the other is the resource adequacy, or RA, the capacity value from our resources that we use to meet our RA compliance. And I'll talk both about RPS and GHG free this evening. Importantly, right now we have RPS compliance requirements, but as SB 100 becomes binding in the future, we'll switch to GHG free compliance. And once again, GHG free is a larger pool that also includes RPS. We'll talk more about this on the next slide as well, but as far as how the values of these resources are determined, energy is going to be valued based on the real-time marginal unit on the grid. And then both RPS, RA, and GHG free, like anything, it's really a question of supply and demand. But importantly, the demand is largely driven by compliance obligations. So you see prices changing with compliance periods. So as we've talked about in the past, RPS prices have gone up as we've approached the end of RPS compliance periods. In the RA space, you see prices changing on a monthly basis because we have monthly compliance obligations. As far as sort of where we think the market is headed, because as Monica teed up, we're looking into the future, and every time we sign a long-term PPA, we're trying to make guesses about what these resources will be worth going forward. So we need to think about what we think all of these important elements will be worth going forward. And so we know over the last decade or so, the duck curve has come to light in California, and so that's really the impact of increasing solar penetration on the system, bringing down midday energy prices. And we've also seen an increasing amount of curtailment, basically energy that's just being thrown away off the grid because there's really no use for it. Interestingly, as we add more batteries, we expect this curve to flatten out a little bit, and that's because these batteries are essentially operating on arbitrage value, right? They want to buy low in the middle of the day and then sell high in the evenings. But because of that, the batteries can actually start to bring down what the marginal unit on the grid is and bring down costs, and so that's going to flatten the duck curve a little bit. RA prices are changing right now. Some of that is because it's a very tight supply market, but we're also undergoing a very big transformation in the RA compliance structure. And because of that, we're going to start seeing different types of resources have very different RA values going forward. And I don't want to spend a lot of time going into the new slice of day structure, but one of the things that we're expecting is that resources that can show in all 24 hours of the day are going to have a higher RA value. And so firm resources like gas and geothermal will be more valuable from an RA perspective. RPS and GHG free value, once again, it's very much supply and demand, but one of the questions that we're going to talk about tonight is whether or not LSEs are going to overbuild relative to their compliance obligations and what that might do to RPS prices going forward. And as I mentioned, GHG free value is also going to become one of the more important compliance constraints going forward. And I think one of the interesting things with GHG free in particular, because it includes hydro, it's going to be impacted by climate change, and we might see more volatility in the supply there. And then finally, if this isn't complicated enough, on top of all of this, we are thinking more and more about regionalization and essentially expanding the CAISO market. And this is going to have its own set of impacts on prices, hopefully help retain the value for resources in California and reduce curtailments. But there's a lot of questions about how all of that will unfold. We also have to question, what technologies are going to be available in the future. And we know that there's quite a few technologies that are not yet commercially viable, but there's a lot of push from especially the federal government to bring these to the point where they are cost competitive. And so I think every resource listed here is part of the DOE's Earthshot initiative. So they're trying to bring costs down and really bring them to market. And I think one of the important things about a lot of these technologies as you look at this list is that they're firm and reliable. So you can imagine that many of these will have a lot of RA value. And they also are going to have flexible dispatch, especially something like gas fitted with carbon capture and storage. Some of the advanced geothermal is more flexible. And so you can imagine it might make more money in the energy markets as well and not sort of further the duck curve. On top of all of this, we also have regulatory risks that we need to think about. So when we met last month, we talked a little bit about all of the capacity that needs to be added to California's grid. And obviously SVC is going to be part of that, but there's a lot of regulatory risk that we have to think about and balance as the procurement team goes out and procures new resources. So we just listed a couple of them here. One big one is stranded asset risk. So we don't want to see new procurement orders coming out that don't allow us to count resources we've already contracted towards our LSE, our obligations as an LSE. We need to think about, potential loss of load due to direct access, which would make a resource no longer needed and potentially uneconomical. And we are also now seeing a central procurement entity, which is going to force resources into our portfolio. And so just last month, the CPUC issued an order to allow the Department of Water Resources to procure up to 10.6 gigawatts of new resources, and we will get an allocation of that. As I've sort of pointed out, that changing compliance obligations can also alter our portfolio value, right? So when the RA construct changed from its ELCC structure to slice of day, that had important implications for the value of all the resources in our portfolio. Similarly, as we move towards SB 100, we expect that GHG-free products will become more expensive as well. We know that the PCIA also has a lot of important impacts on our portfolio. All of the legacy allocations that we get from PG&E come through that PCIA proceeding, so that can impact our portfolio. But as Amrit talked a little bit about earlier, the PCIA values also have an important impact on how we manage our business. And then finally, there's this big question of load uncertainty, which I think I'll show in the next slide. So earlier this year, as part of our risk assessment, we developed a number of plausible but relatively extreme load forecast scenarios. And so this black line here shows our best guess of what we expect our load to look like. But the purple line shows a potential outcome for a low load future. And the blue line shows, once again, a unlikely but possible outcome for a high load future. So when Chris's procurement team is going out and trying to decide what to buy for 2045, there's this huge range of potential loads that we might have to procure to. And a lot of our compliance obligations, really all of them, are dependent upon what our actual load is. So when you take all of this together, there's a number of sort of good portfolio and procurement management practices that we like to follow. And I know there's a lot on this slide, but I think they break down into a couple of sort of key categories. So the first several of these are really about making sure that you have diversity in your procurement. And that diversity can be based on, when you procure, the duration of the contracts, the structures of the contracts, what types of technologies, what counterparties you have. And so it's important to have diversity in all of that. It's very much like putting together your stock portfolio, right? Diversity helps reduce risk. As Ryan pointed out, it's also important that we leave room in our portfolio for potentially emerging technologies that could be useful in the future, as well as those procurement orders or resources that get forced into our portfolio through something like a central procurement entity. And then finally, there's a number of actions you can take to help bring down costs for our customers. So we leverage things like joint procurement, and then we also look for ways to utilize things like tax credits and prepays to help bring down costs for our customers. So with all of that background, I think we can launch into the study itself, though I do want to take a couple minutes and just remind folks why we're having this conversation. I know that Monica teed up some of it at the beginning. But we know that last year we did see a bit of a GHG-free shortage, which put us in a position where we weren't able to hit that 100% annual clean goal. And so I think that stirred up some conversations about how can we make sure that we're able to get there in the future. We also have an IRP, or an integrated resource plan, due next November. And so we're going to have to think through some of this and show our regulators how we plan to get to 2045 next year. And so I think it's important that we start thinking about it ourselves now. But perhaps more importantly, we also have a number of increasingly binding clean constraints as we move towards 2045, right? So by 2030, we need to achieve at least 60% RPS, and then we will transition to that SB 100 GHG-free requirement. And so you see by 2035, we need to be at 90% clean on an annual basis, and then by 2045, we'll all get to that 100% clean target. And importantly, as Monica pointed out, we really need to start thinking about this now, because we know that currently it takes between 3 and 5 years to bring a new resource online. And as we just pointed out, it's important that we ladder these resources in over time, right? We don't want to buy everything at the last minute, and we don't want to buy everything too early. So we have to start phasing a lot of this capacity in. When we look at SVC's historic targets, so as part of our last IRP, the board adopted a RPS target of 75% by 2030, which is 15% above the state mandated target. And we have, of course, also maintain our 100% clean target on an annual basis. But importantly, we do not currently have any explicit RPS targets for post-2030. And when we look at our clean position, we see that we're in good shape to achieve, above the RPS compliance for 2030. But a number of our projects are going to start to roll off as we enter the late 2030s. And so we not only need to hit this, potentially new higher clean target, but we also need to replace a lot of the projects that we've already procured as we get out into the 2040s and 2050s. So with that, I think we can talk a little bit more about the meat of this discussion, the study results. So last December, the board approved a contract with E3, or Energy and Environmental Economics, which is a consulting firm based in San Francisco, but really known nationally to work on energy issues. And the purpose of this study was to assess various clean pathways for our portfolio. And so E3 modeled a number of least cost resource builds for SVCE using different targets, so both annual, hourly, and carbon-free energy scores. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. Once we got all those results back, we completed some additional risk analysis on those portfolios, and we'll also share that with you this evening. I did want to note a couple things on the study before we jump into it. First of all, you've heard me say it before, but all models are wrong, but some are useful. So we think that a lot of this is directionally relevant and is hopefully very useful in guiding our thinking, but just because in one of these portfolios you see we procure 200 megawatts of solar does not, mean that if we pick that target, that's exactly what our portfolio would look like going forward. Importantly, and we'll come back to this again later, the assumptions in this model are aligned with the CPUC's latest integrated resource plan. And so all of the cost assumptions for how much new resources would cost are aligned with that plan. And perhaps even more importantly, the market valuations are aligned with that plan. And so all of the assumed energy and REC and RA prices are aligned with a system that represents something very similar to that plan. We did, of course, include specific assumptions for SVC, including our internal demand forecast. We assumed that we'd continue to get our historic hydro allocations, and then we also put in all of the resources we already have under contract into these results. I wanted to quickly take a moment to define clean again. I think these are things that we've talked about in the past, but just as a reminder, when we talk about an annual clean target, we're really saying that the load serving entity's total annual load is equal to their total clean procurement. So that load and supply doesn't have to be time coincidence as long as it happens in the same year. And I think importantly, given SB 100, every LSC is going to be 100% clean, at least on a retail sales basis, by 2045. So it wouldn't necessarily, SVC wouldn't be differentiated by being 100% clean anymore. The hourly targets state that an LSC's hourly load needs to meet their hourly clean supply. So it is time coincident. There's no compliance obligation to hit a specific hourly target, but because of Senator Becker's SB 1158 bill, which was passed a few years ago, we are going to start tracking that and submitting our hourly numbers to a number of regulatory bodies beginning in 2028. I think one of the things that's important to think about with hourly targets is essentially what you're trying to do if you hit 100% hourly is you're really sort of operating as your own balancing authority. So you effectively islanded yourself as an LSE, and you're no longer really operating in the CAISO market, at least conceptually anymore. The last metric that we looked at was the carbon-free energy score, and this is the metric that Google uses, and it's sort of a mix of the two. So essentially, your carbon-free energy score in a given hour is the weighted average of your supply as an LSE and how clean the grid is when you're leaning on it in order to meet your needs. So you can imagine an LSE that is leaning on the grid in the middle of the day is going to have a higher CFE score than one that's leaning on the grid in the evening when there's more gas units operating on that grid. And then we didn't explicitly model this, but I think it's important that we think about the total emissions impact of all of these portfolios, because even though it's great to say that you're 100% clean or you have a 100% hourly clean target, I think it's important to think how it's actually reducing the total system emissions throughout the state. So with that, we can get to our results. This is just a sort of a few select scenarios. There's a number of other ones that E3 ran, but we thought these were the most important to look at. And first, I want to take just a moment to orient you to this slide. So you'll notice that the first 1,400 or so megawatts on each one of these columns is identical, and it's also the portion of the supply stack that is sort of hatched. And so that's the existing and assumed contracts, and so that's consistent across all of the portfolios. So the new contract requirement would be everything above that dark blue portion, which is our hydro allocation. And there's a couple of sort of key takeaways here. One, that if we go to 100% hourly matching, we might need as much as 2,300 megawatts of new capacity by 2035 versus only 664 megawatts in the 100% annual case. The other thing you'll notice on this slide is for the 100% hourly case, there are actually two columns. And the reason for that is one of the things that we wanted to look at was what it would take to achieve an hourly target on both an expected basis, so essentially you get exactly the load you expected and the output of your resources is exactly what you expected, versus a case where you have a very high probability of hitting that. So perhaps a year where you have very high load and the output of your resources is very low. And what we found is that across all of these hourly cases, you need approximately another 15 to 20% new resource build in order to achieve an hourly target with a high probability. The last thing I'll point out on this results slide is that you'll notice as we move from annual matching cases to hourly cases, the model has a strong preference to add more wind to the portfolios. So I think that's a really good indication that those wind resources are providing energy in some of the dirtiest hours for the grid. And in fact, when you look forward at the GHG emissions impact, you can really see this perhaps even more clearly. So what we did for this portion of analysis is we took the results from E3 and we plugged them into what's called the Clean System Power Tool, and this is something that the CPUC uses in the IRP proceeding. So this first slide is essentially showing what the impact of SVC's load and its portfolio for each one of these scenarios is on the grid. So you can imagine if we had no load and no portfolio, that number would be 0. And there's a pretty clear trend here that as soon as you go from an annual matching case to an hourly matching case, you go from net positive emissions to negative emissions. And so what that's really saying is that in the hourly cases, your portfolio is dispatching in hours that allow the gas system to be used less. But that does come at a significant cost. And so the next graphic here shows how much additional cost is associated with each ton of CO2 reduction in the portfolio. And a big part of the reason why you see it being so much more expensive as you hit a higher hourly target is because if you look at the final graphic here, a lot of the additional energy that's being procured is going to hours which are already relatively clean. And moreover, a lot of that energy is actually not being used at all. So you have significant curtailment and excess supply in these more restrictive hourly matching scenarios. And in fact, in the 100% hourly scenario, you can actually see that you're procuring roughly 150% of what you're actually needing to meet your load. So let's talk a little bit about the costs of all of these portfolios. So what the model results show, and once again, this model is assuming, certain costs that are aligned with the IRP plan. Those costs that are baked into the model for new resources are probably a little bit on the low end. So I think this is a conservative estimate of the numbers. But what we see is that relative to the annual 90% case, which we show as essentially the base case here because that's minimum compliance, moving all the way up to a 100% hourly portfolio would cost an additional $300 million per year. So a pretty steep increase. And I guess I'll pause here and point out that part of the reason why we did this study is because a number of other entities started exploring 24/7, including a few CCAs. And one of their findings was that this going to 24/7 isn't necessarily more expensive. So this $300 million might come as a bit of a shock. But I want to sort of walk you through why they had the finding that they did. And what it really comes down to is whether or not you can monetize these extra resources, right? So if we go back to the very beginning of this presentation, we take all of our resources and we try to sell them into the market. And so what this study showed was that theoretically much of that $300 million could be offset by market revenues. And so let me try to walk you through this graphic. This is for the 100% hourly case. Essentially what it's saying is that we would expect to spend $43 per megawatt hour or 4.3 cents per kilowatt hour in order to buy resources for that portfolio. But the model would suggest that we would have expected offsetting revenue of 3.6 cents. And what basically that blue portion of the bar is the potential energy revenue, so that's the majority of it. And then you would also get some revenue from RECs in this scenario. And so you'd really only have a net cost of $7 per megawatt hour to get to a 24/7, 100% clean portfolio. But I think the thing that's really important here is that once again, this is assuming that SVC is a price taker and that all of these market prices are aligned with that IRP plan. And that IRP plan assumes that market participants in general are not going to exceed the SB 100 requirements. And so if you actually have a number of entities going above and beyond their compliance, you're going to have a lot of excess supply in the market. and there's potential that that would really crash the energy revenue prices as well as the REC prices. So these results are very uncertain and very dependent on actual market conditions going forward. Importantly, even if, generally speaking, the market or the system looks like the IRP plan, there's still significant market risk associated with this portfolio. And that's really because as our oversupply increases, we're subjected to more market exposure and therefore market risk. So we estimate that that 100% hourly scenario would have up to $90 million a year at risk. And once again, that's assuming that the underlying system assumptions are broadly correct. So this is really, that $90 million is really noise around expected market prices and noise around what our load would look like. So once again, the actual value at risk might be significantly higher. It could be more like that 300 million plus for the resource build. And so I think we have to bring this back to what the potential rate impact would be. So our projected generation rate for 2025 is 13 cents a kilowatt hour. It's hard to know what rates will look like in 2035, so we didn't want to speculate too much. But hopefully that provides, a little bit of a sense of where we are today. So that E3 cost range would suggest the increase would be anywhere from 0.7 cents to that full 4.3 cents, assuming that you wouldn't be able to make any money in the energy or RPS markets. Once again, those E3 estimates are also very much subject to changes in costs in the market going forward. So our very rough estimate total rate impact is anywhere from 5 to 66% if we were to go to full 24/7. But lots of uncertainty there as well. So I wanted to wrap up with a little bit on the sort of merits of different clean options, right? So certainly we could actually sort of step back, and instead of staying at 100% clean, there is the option to move to minimum compliance, and that would be for 2035 a 90% annual target. It would be less expensive. We think it would still be reliable, and it would, by the state's definitions, meet clean requirements. I think one of the important things about minimum compliance is that you do have higher compliance risk, of course. So one of the things we really emphasize in our RPS plan when we submit it to the CPUC is that one of our big risk mitigants is that we have that 15% target buffer, right? We're going for 75, we only need 60. So there's some room for error in our forecasting, as well as, if we have resource delays or things of that nature. The annual target, right, we could be anywhere from 90 to 100%. It is our current policy. I know we've seen some short-term challenges, but it also does align with SB 100. As we've just pointed out, moving to an hourly 24/7 target, it might be very clean, but it also has high costs associated with it and a lot of risk around what those costs might look like. Finally, we could do something more like the Google CFE score, which, as I've pointed out before, is sort of a balance of both annual and hourly in some ways, as it does continue to incentivize LSEs to build clean resources in the dirtier hours without really islanding the LSE like a 24/7 portfolio would. So just to wrap up here, we do think that the annual clean target is sustainable, but we do recognize that there may be challenges in meeting it on every single year. If we were to move to a 100% clean portfolio through long-term PPAs by 2035, we think that would be very challenging to get that 2,300 or so megawatts into the portfolio. And of course, we I think emphasized throughout this presentation that we do think that there's a lot of risk associated with that level of over-procurement relative to our compliance obligations. So we really want to think about how to responsibly manage our obligations to both achieve our mission, but also ensure affordability and ensure we have funds available for our programs and all of the other activities that SVC is trying to accomplish through our mission. So very quickly, I did want to give a sense of some things that staff is already planning on doing. So we are looking to further assess the viability of various 2035 targets, including, I think we're focusing on achieving 100% by 2035. We would have to set an internal goal that is lower because we need to leave room for that central procurement that might be forced into our portfolio. And I think even if we set a 100% RPS target, we probably could also set a clean hourly target, or at least understand what viable clean hourly targets might be associated with that type of portfolio. We're also looking at doing what we're calling, at least for now, an integrated decarbonization planning process. You might have noticed as we talked through today, all of the resources that were in this portfolio were very much on the supply side, and so we want to think more about how load management might play a role in creating a clean portfolio for SVCE. And then, as I pointed out, we do have an IRP due at the end of 2025, so we will be returning to the board to get more feedback on clean targets that we might want to assess for that compliance plan. And with that, I will just show the questions once again, but I will turn it back to the chair for any questions or comments or discussion. Thanks for listening.
Wow, thank you, Maren. Monica, thanks for framing it at the beginning. This is truly the long-term vision. And Maren, you have done a fabulous job of presenting this extremely complex subject with slides that are seemingly very straightforward, but there's a lot packed into that. As you were talking, I was jotting down some key thoughts. Essentially, in this very complex environment, planning long-term with modeling that has layers and layers of assumptions that are coming from areas that we have no control over, including the regulatory environment, especially that, and with talk of regionalization happening, all of these could, the impacts could be really wild swings. That's kind of how I was thinking about it. So not a small thing. And the impact at the end, we're not just talking clean and affordable and everything, but the impact could be such high that we have to make sure we sustain as an organization while we are serving our customers and keeping clean. So really, you did a fabulous job. And with all that uncertainty, let's start with questions. Director Lee, then Director Risto, I saw. Oh, no? Okay. Then Director George, what's your name? Tyson. Sorry. My brain is in all that uncertainty. Thank you. Director Lee.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This has been a very educational vision review of what this organization has gone through and discussed. So I just want to say thank you very much, like echoing the Chair's comments on this presentation. Some basic questions first, and I'll go dive in. First question is about the definition of dirtier hours. Is that the time when we have less solar production and that the usage is very high, like during the early evening times, that when you get more dirtier supply, or if you could help understand that?
Yeah, I think you're thinking about it the right way. I guess one way I'd put it is, when is there more of the gas fleet being deployed? But that's exactly, it's when the solar is not available, that's when they're going to turn on those gas assets.
Right, and so I guess one of the things you talk about load management, that's what we're talking about, is trying to shift some of the energy production or saved up so that we could save it through whatever storage, like battery, for example, so that those would be deployed during the maximum demand time. Is that what you're talking about when you say load management, or you're talking about something else?
Yeah. I think that's certainly part of it. There's been a push, both I think internally, but also more broadly with the regulators, to think about how we can shape when the load shows up on the grid, so that we can move more of it to the middle of the day when the grid is cleaner. And so that's something that wasn't really explicitly modeled or thought about in this process so far, but something we're looking to do in the future.
So, for example, I always try to get my cars charged during the middle of the day when the sun is the strongest, especially in the summertime. And because my batteries are full, and all that's going back to, actually, does it go back to PG&E, though? Does it go back to SVCE, Monica? That's one I always have questions on these days when, as a subscriber of the process right now.
The energy itself?
Yeah, the battery, the excess battery going back to the grid. Normally, if I subscribe to PG&E, it goes back to PG&E. But in this case, since I'm a SVC subscriber, does it get back to SVC, which I hope it is, but going back to PG&E, given the new CPUC rates, practically I'm getting nothing. Monica, you know what I'm talking about?
If I'm understanding your question, when you sell back to the grid, who benefits from your excess or surplus energy that goes back
Right,
to
is
the
that
grid?
energy going back to SVC, or is it actually going to PG&E if I'm a SVC subscriber?
Well, I mean, it's going to the grid. I guess if you're an SVC customer, it's benefiting SVC, because what you're doing is you're helping bring down our energy costs. And so that's a benefit to us.
Which would be music to my ears. I
Yeah.
have no problem benefiting SVC, just that if I'm giving this back to PG&E practically for free, obviously it costs me more of a...
I mean, I think physically you're not sending it back to the grid, because we don't have the capability of sending energy back to the grid, right? So I think what it's doing is just reducing that obligation of what we have to buy in those hours. So it does benefit us.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
Right,
so
that's a
right?
good thing.
Yeah, because physically we don't
Yeah.
send it back to the grid.
Yeah.
So-
You're a very good grid citizen if you're charging
Yay.
your batteries in the middle of the day, so yes.
So very quickly, yes, no from Director Makachek on this, because I want Dr. Lee to continue. Yes, you agree? You were going to say something.
Yes, and I've been monitoring the same thing, and I know Director Lee, we've had some conversations on this. But what I find disheartening is the rates aren't aligned with the carbon content of the power. And the word curtailment, as you know, just drives me, it makes me very unhappy. Because we shouldn't be curtailing power when I could be charging my vehicle at that time, but I'm incented to, by the rates, to charge my vehicle at like after midnight, and that's when the the carbon content is the highest. So I think we've got a lot of work to do with the CPUC and getting them to understand how the rates affect things. So I'm on the same page as you, Director Lee.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director Makachek. Back to you, Director Lee.
Sure. I would direct the looking back at this beautiful chart, if we could get back to that slide, please, with the full comparison of the minimum compliance, the annual hourly 24/7 versus the CFE. Yes, that's the one, correct. So let me try to make sure I understand what this chart says. It looks like if you want something just dirt cheap, you could go with the minimum compliance, and that we would likely have high compliance risk as mentioned there. And out of the four is the least clean option. And then you have the other three where the most cleanest would be the hourly 24/7. The problem with that is extremely costly. And so what we left up with is what we're doing right now, which is the annual 90 to 100%, where it's fairly affordable, but would be also fairly clean. But then there is another option with the so-called CFE, which I guess stands for carbon-free energy, of a scoring system with Google, that would allow us to accomplish fairly similar clean goal, but then at the end of the day, though, it'll be more affordable than what we're doing now. So are we supposed to discuss now or in the future whether or not we might want to change this concept to something like the CFE, where we are accomplishing a similar goal but then save us money? Is that what this chart's trying to show?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the only thing maybe 2 points I would add. One, theoretically, we could blend options, right? You could have an annual goal with a CFE on top of it. The other thing is, this is the 3 that we decided to look at for modeling purposes, but there are other metrics that could potentially be used as well, right? You might not need a strict CFE goal, for example, but perhaps in your PPA evaluation, you might want to check emissions and have some sort of emissions target baked into something like that. So there's other ways that we could sort of broaden exactly the targets that we're looking at, but I think this is a decent snapshot of a number of different options that could be taken.
And when should this board be making that decision? I mean, this is a very long-term decision, obviously, but what's the plan of us? Are we supposed to evaluate this and then come up with some type of a vote down the road regarding this choice?
Yeah, my understanding, and I welcome Monica to comment on timing here too, so we are hoping to come back to the board with, I think, a more specific recommendation in the next several months. I think we will have to have portfolios that we model for that IRP. There's a question of, do we set the target and then do the modeling? Do we set some, potential scenarios we want to look at in the IRP, and then once that's been done, have the board adopt something? So there's still a bit of a range of possibilities there. Monica, anything to add on timing or?
No, I think that's right. I think, again, the big thing is trying to kind of set that target for us, because we are doing procurement now. And as Marin pointed out, the only target that we really have beyond the 100% annual from an RPS standpoint is to get to 75% by 2030, and we're essentially really close to being there. So any incremental procurement that we're doing needs to be towards, in addition to working towards our compliance obligations, needs to be towards some policy that the board sets, whether it's 100% clean, 100% RPS, or some hourly target. Because if the board decides to adopt an hourly target, like one that it's 100% on a 24/7 basis, that's going to shift how we procure and what types of resources we seek. Because even solar with storage is not going to get us there. We're going to have to go pursue a whole lot of geothermal that is very hard to get right now, and bring those and try really hard to get those resources. So we need this both for the IRP planning, to be clear on what we're all trying to achieve, but also to kind of direct the procurement that we're doing now, as we have to do.
Great. And you mentioned various area of risk. So one of the risks you mentioned is the fact of over procurement. If we bought too much of this green stuff, which is very costly, then we are, quote unquote, potentially wasted. So question number one, how about the issue of building or finding more capacity to store the energy, whether it's battery or other ways? Have we looked into that? Because I do understand, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the price of battery storage based on time actually has been dropping. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Monica or Chris speak to the cost of battery storage. I think theoretically it's falling. I think recent market prices have been higher, but
And I assume, Marin, that your portfolios included battery storage in them.
They did include batteries. Once again, this is at least the way the model thinks about it, it thinks that this is a least cost build to achieve the targets. It does assume that the system as a whole is building for reliability. So you could add batteries, but to some degree, they might not be useful. So it might not be the most effective way to do it.
Yeah. So I think any target that we set is going to involve, because just we need the clean energy, is going to involve a lot more solar. And if we bring more solar into the portfolio, we have to bring storage with that solar,
Exactly.
right? To extend the life, to extend the value, and to get resource adequacy value out of it as well. So that's a given, right? In terms of, are the prices coming down? We don't know. We haven't seen a significant decrease in price, quite frankly, and we issue RFPs, long-term RFPs, on a pretty frequent basis, and we're not seeing it. But the bigger question is, like, how much lithium-ion storage can California really absorb? I mean, we're already seeing a lot of it on. We went from, I think, something like hundreds to 3,000 megawatts of lithium-ion storage on the grid.
I think that study I read that came out the other week, I think we've gone from 500 in 2019 to over 11,000 megawatts.
Yeah,
Wow.
so some big number.
It's
And that's a
huge.
lot of lithium-ion storage, 4-hour storage, kind of at max for the grid to absorb. So there's going to have to be a different storage solution than just 4-hour batteries, right? We all know that.
Right.
And part of what the central procurement entity is kind of looking at is, what can that alternative storage resource be that supports a reliable and clean grid? And so they're looking at multi-day storage. Multi-day storage is very expensive and doesn't really pencil out for an entity like SVCE or for any CCA for that matter. So it's not something that we're willing to undertake on our own necessarily, given current technology and availability of these resources. But it's something that the CPE may do, and then again assign us a portion. So that's why our planning has changed fundamentally with the central procurement entity. We now have to understand what they're pursuing and see how it fits into our procurement needs as well. So storage is definitely going to be, especially if we retire gas, right? Because gas provides, when we went through the whole primer on capacity and energy, gas is a very reliable resource. Batteries can help, but they're not the solution. They're not a replacement for gas. And so, but there'll be storage.
I mean, obviously, the issue with solar is that if you some kind of a storm over an area for a substantial amount of time, say 4 days or whatever, that could significantly affect the amount of generation as well, right? And without the storage, how are we going to make up to make sure the stability of the system has the energy required? So I just want to throw that out to you. I mean, I'm a big fan of solar, clearly, but I just want to say that ultimately there are those cases where we cannot control the weather, right?
So if I may, this is a very complex subject, and we are not going to resolve everything tonight, and this is just in question mode. I certainly know all three persons right next to me have their hands raised. I have some questions. Bear with me for 1 second. I don't want to forget any public comment. We haven't gotten any, so let's just do that right now before I forget.
I see none in person, Chair, but we do have somebody online. Bruce Carney, when you are ready.
Okay, let's take public comment. Bruce, thank you so much for your time. And
yeah, thank you for a fascinating presentation. A couple comments I wanted to make. I know that PCE did similar analysis a few months ago. In their planning, rather than trying to, in the extreme scenarios, match to 100% of actual load, I think they modeled matching 100% of the 1 day ahead forecast, which allowed them to perhaps come in at a little bit lower price point because they had more certainty as to what they needed to produce or provide. But what I want to focus most of my thoughts on are really the affordability aspects of electricity versus natural gas. And I think my thinking has changed over time from 10 years ago when I advocated strongly for 100% annual matching and have leaned toward 100% 24/7 by 365. I now understand more clearly that we're in a price war with natural gas, and natural gas over the last 15 years has largely gotten cheaper and cheaper. If you set aside things like the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which spiked natural gas prices around the world, the fracking revolution has made gas more affordable. But what I've also been told is that 80% of the cost of PG&E's natural gas that I as a consumer pay is overhead, and only 20% is the actual cost of the gas itself. And so I'd love to see the sophisticated modeling that's been deployed in the analysis of electricity pricing and how you produce it, very, very cleanly, to look at what does the future look like if we see a substantial uptake of heat pump water heaters, heat pump HVAC systems, if we see the BACMed 2027, 2028 rules really rolling out, do we find ourselves in a situation where electricity, whether it's 100% clean or 90% clean, becomes more competitive against natural gas than it is right now? Because I do believe, and this is a change of my opinion over the last several years, is that it's more important to accelerate the swap out of natural gas for electricity, even if that electricity isn't pristinely clean electricity. We just need to get the gas out of the system. And so the metric that would help us understand that is really service territory-wide GHG emissions, and seeing which model is likely to drive that down the fastest. Thanks for your time.
Mr. Carney, thank you so much for bringing those two subjects here to our attention. One of the things I was going to ask at the end was where are the other CCAs, because everybody's in the same boat down the road. How are we planning? How are the others planning? And the other issue you brought forward is about the affordability. You're specifically talking electricity versus natural gas. I was thinking more in terms of the rate and the uncertainty. So as we move forward with this, let's continue with any other public comment?
No additional public comment.
Okay, I'm going to close public comment and we'll continue with the questions here. Vice Chair Tyson, then Director Makachuk, then Director Klein. In that order we're going to move. Great,
thank you. And I appreciate the chance to review this ahead of time through the Risk Oversight Committee too, so that was helpful. I came up with some thoughts as this is coming along, and one of the important ones was that the growth that your high growth potential showed a fair amount of growth there. And I was wondering a couple of things. To what extent does that include the unknown AI energy requirement growth? And then also, to what extent is that growth, it depends on what kind of growth it is. Is it what time of day? Because that's the nature of what we're juggling. So I don't expect to have answers. I just want to raise these points as a couple of things that I've noticed here. Secondly, whenever you show the resources dropping off after 2030, it gives me a feeling in the pit of my stomach like, oh no, because that's when our contract ends. But where do those resources go? Isn't it still there? It's just a question of who's going to contract for it. And so when we're planning ahead, if we're the strongest, if we have the most days of reserve, if we're the ones who can muscle out the other CCOs, we can not only retain those, but take some of theirs.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Monica speak to a lot of this, but you're right, the resources don't cease to exist, and there's actually a huge number of resources, especially renewables that were sort of the original fleet of renewables that are now, their contracts are rolling off, and those resources need to be repowered. We've contracted some of these resources, and I think there's a lot of potential for the existing fleet that just sort of needs to be refreshed and brought back.
And I don't need an answer now. I'm just flagging it. But if you want to, go ahead.
Yeah. I think it's safe to assume that they are not our resources once our contract expires.
Right.
And so that is what we reflect in our
fair.
plans. We will do, we don't have any rights to any of those resources, but we will do our solicitations much like we do now. And if it's the best project, then that's the one we'll pursue.
Somebody's going to buy it. Okay.
Yes.
I'm most of the way done here. You noticed that hourly requirement creates us as an island, but I don't think actually it does, because it means then that we have to over procure so much that then we now have to go shopping. And the thing that strikes me is we don't get a PCIA. If we have stranded resources, we are stuck, we're stranded. And so it's just my reaction to saying I see the danger of that over procurement and how that could really damage us. So that's, I guess it was originally a question, but I think we'll turn that into a comment. Another comment is, isn't there something between hourly and annually that's useful? I've got to think so, because, to say, well, what if we were 3/4 of the year we were 100% and not so much that winter time or something. I'm just puzzling over this to say, could we set, because what I saw was some really extreme pricing things, and it told me we're way on this curve where I don't see how we're going to get there, not to sort of predetermine what everybody else thinks. They sound really expensive, so where else can we be on the curve that makes sense for us, including looking at other forms of the model? And I think that's all my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I heard the word monthly from a couple of persons responding to your question, a rhetorical question. Director Makachek.
There's a lot to unpack and understand in that presentation. But I believe, and I don't like to use the word hope, but I like to believe that technology will come, and if you think of demand response and how to do load shedding and going the other way to use more load when it's available, I think that the scenarios are it's good to have them, but I'm relying on technology to help us in the future, and particularly on real-time pricing and providing other incentives. And if you think about going towards more EVs, and if you look at the way the world is going, California is going, with work from home. So think of a lot of vehicles that could be parked one day a week, and they could be charged and then discharged. So I think that there will be more lithium-ion storage, but it's not in place. It's EV related. So I think there's some bright spots there, but I like the way we're going and looking ahead. And I guess my final observation is that does it have to, and maybe it's goes along with the other comments that were made, is this all or nothing in one type of measurement? And if you look at our days of financial strength, then from a reserve perspective, can we start with one level and then as we move forward adjust it, or do we have to set those goals now, and what they are now is what they're going to be forever, sort of thing? So comments and then a question for you.
Yeah, I think on whether or not the target needs to be set permanently, I think the answer is not necessarily. And we could set shorter term targets and have sort of soft targets for the longer term and leave room in our portfolio for all of these changes that you're speaking about. And I will say that integrated decarbonization plan I hinted at the end, I think it's going to hopefully address some of these broader questions around, what can we do with different load scenarios, with more AI in our, service territory, with potentially emerging technologies which also weren't available for this model, right? The model didn't have the option to select advanced geothermal or some of these other resources. So I think there's more work that we can do, and things are going to change as we move forward. And so, setting maybe a hard target for 2035, but have a little bit more flexibility in 2045, I think is certainly an option.
That certainly makes sense, Maureen. It's, as Director Makachek said, it's the unknown unknowns, and with time they are going to happen and change. Again, going back to the layers of assumptions that you referred to. Director Klein?
Sure, I'll try to keep it short because of the hour. But I appreciate the report, the info, a lot to unpack, and I do have questions about lithium cells and how they how they'll basically supply us in the long term, and whether or not that's truly scalable. So your study doesn't, and you mentioned in passing, it's like geothermal, but to me, we keep hearing about, small modular reactors from a nuclear standpoint. Is that actually on the horizon how much it wasn't part of your model, but it's been talked about. And is there a timeline where this is actually viable?
Yeah, with the SMRs, I believe they are building a demonstration project in Wyoming right now. Whether or not it's politically viable in California is sort of a different question. But I think there's a chance that it could be built in California, or it could be built out of state and imported into California. A lot of California's energy comes from Palo Verde, which is located out of state, and that's a large nuclear plant. So yeah, there's a lot of question marks around those emerging technologies, but I think they're all worth exploring further.
Yeah, and to me, I have called on, I've talked to state legislators for years on that, because to me that's the continuous resource. And yes, it's California. That being said, it's proven worldwide to be viable. It's just, there's a lot of history as far as how it was built previously, and everything is a one-off as opposed to duplicating modular and all that. And then we keep talking about storage. I know that there's been talk about mechanical storage, so pumping water uphill and everything else to try to deal with that. Is that being tried anywhere currently in California that you know of? Because that to me is more of actually, when you start talking about the simplicity of mechanical as opposed to other things, it's a easier sort of solution.
Yeah, there are a few existing pump storage facilities in California. The largest is Helms, which is owned by PG&E. They actually have a pending application to expand that facility and add, I think, another 100 or so megawatts to it. So there seems to be a desire for those types of resources. And I believe we've looked at some other mechanical type storage technologies in the past as well. So I think there's certainly proven technology like pump storage, and then I think there's some other ones that are currently being sort of evaluated and tested in the market.
Okay, and then I'll just echo what was said previously. I think we're on the right track in general, and figuring out where we are a few years from now, 5 years down the road, of are there improvements, can we go greener, is I think the right solution. But I appreciate what you've done. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Showalter.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts, and this is really new to me, so this may have all been discussed in the risk management committee or something, but first, I'm always doing the water analogies, right? Well, one of them is called distributed infrastructure versus capitalized infrastructure, and distributed infrastructure is basically like you have your own cistern, and you have your own stormwater management system. You have lots of you have conservation efforts that are distributed throughout the community. They're not necessarily owned by they're not owned by a company like PG&E or one of our producers. And analogous to that would of course be the batteries in trucks, right? Batteries in trucks or school buses I've read about, or cars that will be distributed, and how that will work. But the other thing I just want to talk about is demand management. And it seems like, when you look at this graph that shows the 90% hourly, and then this huge jump to 98% and then 100. Well, that makes me beg the question of what about demand management, in the sense of what kind of conservation? What would conservation cost? And is that something? I know a couple of summers ago we were going to have a brownout, right? And the governor said, or somebody said, you've got to turn off your air conditioners, or we're all gonna be in the dark. And people responded, well, that's a little bit dramatic. But I think on a more realistic basis, what about some more emphasis on things like insulation and things that reduce the amount of energy that we're using in the first place. And certainly AI just goes completely against that. But I still think it's something to always keep in the mix. So thank you. This is fascinating.
Other questions, comments? Seeing none, I'll pick up right where you were, Director Showalter. As the building stock ages and gets rebuilt, those changes, I believe, will be happening with the building code being updated. And I would assume you have included some of that, because one of your prior models for something much simpler, I remember talking about how are you incorporating the increase in housing that the state is projecting and so on and so forth. So I'm just assuming, I'm not even asking that question here. A lot of that would be built into your models there. I will still go back to one little clarification I wanted regarding the rates. You pointed out that at the end of it, I noticed two things. One was the total impact range could be, this is slide number 21, the range could be 5% to 66% increase in rates, which is dramatic, understandable. On the other hand, a few slides prior to that, slide number 19, you talked about expected cost being 4.3 cents per kilowatt hour versus expected offsetting revenue at 3.6 cents, with the net cost increase only 0.7. So I am missing something here. To me, those two seem quite different. If you can help me with that clarification, please.
Yeah, I believe the math that was done here was that 5 to 66%. I think the 0.7 cents represents a 5% increase on the 13 cents, and that if you were to do the full 4.3% increment, that would be the 66%. Oh, I'm sorry. And then for the 66%, you also have to bake in the 2x number on the third bullet. So that's saying that the supply, the impact on, or sorry, that there's an additional sort of adder based on the fact that E3's numbers might be low. Once again, that's not commentary on E3. It's just that the IRP tended to have low numbers.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. Thank you, Scott. And it doesn't surprise me when, to me, the bottom line is the total impact range is from 5% to 66%. Somebody could wonder why that wide range, but I think that is the statement which is saying this is such a complex market with so many things that are out of our control. We don't know where this is headed. And to go back to one of your responses to one of the director's questions, perhaps one approach could be, this is not you telling us, but you were saying maybe one approach is planning with more hard targets for 2030, 35, and maybe softer targets after that, because things will change, as I have heard all of my colleagues say, and I didn't hear you, Maureen or Monica, say that they won't change. So those are some of my thoughts, but my other question is, where are the other CCAs? What are we hearing from them, or maybe from Cal CCA, because this is happening, impacting everyone?
Yeah, good question. I don't know all of the CCA's specific targets. I know that there are other CCAs looking at whether or not it makes sense to move towards an hourly target. As I pointed out, some of them have done studies that show that it might be very cost effective to do so. But I think there's a sort of wide variety of approaches to this at this point.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and one that we should have probably prepared, because I know that I had anticipated that this question was going to come up, but we haven't really done the deep dive on it. My understanding is that some CCAs have set an aggressive RPS target, like 100% by 2030. We know of one CCA that has 100% by 2030 with like an 80% hourly target, so combined. But for the most part, a lot of the CCAs do not have an aggressive target beyond what is required by the state, so 60% by 2030. And I don't know of any CCAs that has undertaken this type of a study on a pathway to 2045. I think a lot of them will see it as part of this next IRP cycle. And so that's when we usually get a lot of insight as to what other CCAs are doing, because we all set plans and then we all miss those plans, right? That's just the nature of planning in this environment. So we all set targets, and sometimes we hit them and sometimes we don't. So when we see the IRPs and we see what they're posted in IRPs, that's when we get a better sense of what they're actually able to accomplish or think they're going to be able to accomplish. But I think at a minimum, we can just do a search or scan of their websites to see what, if anything, they've put in place as a policy. I think it's time for us to do that, and we'll do that and bring it back to you the next time we come.
That sounds exciting. One other clarification that I would like, it has been mentioned that, of course, the resources are not going to cease to exist once our contracts expire. So I will say this, no question. No question is an unsmart question, I'll put it politely. So I'm going to ask a question which seems ignorant, but I am not familiar with this. What happens beyond, is there a certain life cycle of these projects beyond which it is exponentially expensive to keep them running, or what is needed at that point? And I'm just asking a very broad question.
Yeah. I think that the solar panels themselves and the batteries have a life expectancy, right? And so the decision that the developer or the owner of that project will make at the time that they get to the end of a contract is whether or not there's any residual value to the facility. If there's value to the facility, then the decision has to be, is this the best value for this site? Because a lot of the value of resources, capacity in California, whether it be solar, wind, geothermal, is really the location that it's at. And so they'll make that decision. Does it make sense to use our interconnection capacity in our site for this solar, or does it make sense to do something else on this site? So those are the decisions that the owner of that resource and the person who has the organization that has site control will have to make. It may stay, it may not stay. We don't know. But for the most part, I think batteries have about a 15-year life on them. And solar panels have a pretty long life. I think some of PG&Es have been around for decades, right?
Yeah, 20, 25 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, you have demonstrated that we will not have control over those decisions, rightfully. I mean, as we have been talking this evening. So a lot of it is unknown at this point, and we just keep on moving forward, and I'll steal the word used by my colleague in a different context earlier. We continue to evolve to meet the needs and keep our goal where we want as a policy to keep on reducing emissions as far as we possibly can stretch ourselves. That's kind of what I'm hearing from everyone here, including from you, Monica, and from you, Aaron.
Yeah. But to be clear, we will come back to the board maybe in a month or two.
Yes.
And have you actually approve a target so that we can plan around that target.
Absolutely. You'll need something more concrete. Do you have enough from this discussion tonight to move forward for now?
Something between hourly and annual.
I heard the word monthly from a few, from a couple of persons, and I think I heard quarterly or something. I don't know. What else would you need from us tonight? What would you find more helpful?
Maureen?
I mean, I think this was helpful. I think it's something that we can take back. And as I mentioned, some of this is also us getting comfortable with these results and thinking through, can we actually procure enough to hit some of these? So I think we can take this back and hopefully come back with some clear recommendations.
The other, I'm not suggesting you do this. We have the executive committee chair here. But one thought I have is, after tonight, when you go back, if you think you need more clarification in the exec committee that will meet later this month, perhaps you could come back with that. And we would all have also had the opportunity to absorb all this information and perhaps give you a little more suggestions there before bringing it back to the board.
Yeah, that's most definitely our plan, is to come to the executive committee first with the recommendation. But we wanted to give you all the benefit of seeing the analysis and kind of the thinking, and really to make sure that we're in alignment with the goals and the risks that we see with some portfolios relative to, and I think what the feedback I heard is that you understand and you see that over procuring has some real risk associated with it.
Yes, and I agree wholeheartedly that it was important to bring it at this stage to the whole board. There are members here who contribute a lot, and they are not, we wouldn't have had the benefit of those thought processes if we had gone straight to the exec committee. So, okay, are we in a good place with that?
Yes,
Super. Big thanks, and as we thought, this would be the subject which would take some time tonight. Maureen, thank you so much. Monica, thanks. With that, we are getting closer towards the main agenda items, and we have a closed session item, but before that, very quickly, let's take a couple of minutes if needed for board member announcements and direction on future agenda items. So any announcements from any member of the board? Director Mekachek?
I'd like to congratulate you and Director Ristow on being elected. Yeah, thank you. So I think we'll have some continuity here. And then the other thing is I'm looking forward to going on October the 10th to the ribbon cutting. And the week after, I'm not sure if anyone's going to League of California Cities annual conference, but that would be good to see a contingent there. And then my final comment is if anyone on the board is running in an election, I would like to endorse them. And
Brian,
sorry.
Brian?
Oh, sorry,
No,
I can't just say that.
No, we can't
Okay,
talk
sorry.
about that here.
Okay.
Right, Michael? Okay,
Oh.
let's skip that. Let's,
yeah.
I
No, I
think
understand.
my instinct says.
No
yeah.
endorsements, yes.
Okay. Those are my comments.
Okay, I do appreciate you bringing up October 10th. I'll have company starting here, not just from SFO, which I know Monica and some other members are coming. And I believe I see a question. Andrea sent another email earlier this week for the ribbon cutting for October 10th. And if you have any questions, I think you can follow up with Andrea. And Cal Cities Conference, yes. So maybe we can carpool, not from here to LA, but from here to the airport. And I'm sure there are other members of the board who may be planning the Cal Cities Conference as well. Since that was your question. Any other announcements? Director Risto?
Yeah, I don't actually have an announcement, but I got a text from Director Meadows that she had a drop off at 8:38, so I don't know if that was picked up, but we lost her about then, for the record.
Okay, thank you for sharing that with us. Yeah, it's been a little difficult week for her. We do appreciate her staying here as long as she could. And Director Klein?
Very quickly, so most of you, I think, should have already received the invite to Sunnyvale State of the City. If you haven't visited the City Hall, it went out to every council. Anyway, at least that's what my clerk said. So if you haven't been to our Sunnyvale City Hall yet, we will be having State of the City on Saturday, September 21st at 9 a.m. And there will be the standard refreshments, but speeches, new artwork that's opening up, new amphitheater, and of course the wonderful facility. So if you haven't had a chance, definitely come. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. No, I don't know what happens. So I certainly haven't received that. Director Lee?
I think the mayor has been very shy. It's a LEED platinum City Hall. This is how big a deal this is. Thank you.
The first in the city when it started. So yes, that's quite a building. And I was just sharing earlier with some folks, the first time I saw the building, the architect in me was literally drooling over all the details. It's quite a building if you haven't seen it. Okay, other announcements? Future agenda items? Okay, I don't see any hands raised, even online. So with that, we are going to take public comment on the closed session. The closed session item is public employee performance evaluation for the Chief Executive Officer who's been with us for 6 months. Any public comment? Seeing none, we are going to go into closed session now, and Andrea will coordinate with the board members who need the Zoom link. I just want to make sure those board members who are online, you need a different Zoom link. Please check in with Andrea in case you don't recall the email that she did send out yesterday or today earlier. Thank you so much, Andrea. And after that, we will come back here to end the board meeting. Thanks. End of the meeting, and the board just came back at 10:08 from the closed session, and there is nothing to report. With that, the meeting is adjourned at 10:08 p.m. Thank you so much. Have a nice evening.
Good night.
Thank you.